Welcome to Love, Dream, Live, your source of life lessons that inspire you to love intensely, dream relentlessly, and live passionately. Our goal is to help you create harmony in your work, personal life, and self-discovery journey. Welcome your host, Aida, with today's topic.
Hey, wonderful. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really excited about today's topic. It's going to be about the difference between living from your heart and living from your head, which really does make a major impact on the direction of your life and on how you see the world. And I've actually lived in both scenarios. I've actually lived inside of my head and I've actually lived outside of my heart. And I've worked on having harmony between both of them instead of having a consistent tug-of-war between one or the other. I'm going to start with living out of our heads. So living out of our heads, we're kind of turned outward into the world. We are very focused on the external world. We want to measure things. We want to capture things. We're concerned with facts and figures. So whenever we read things, we're very much concerned with the scientific evidence, the proof, the reasoning behind it, and we're very discerning because our mind loves to divide things and categorize things and organize them and label them. And so our mind thrives out of polar opposites. It wants to know if something is dark or light. It wants to know if something is positive or negative. Our mind is very linear, so it wants to find contrast and evidence. And it does this by looking to the external world for validation and for proof that we are right. Because when we live out of our head, we're very concerned with being right. We're very concerned with not making mistakes. And this is because our mind is very judgmental and it has resistance towards failure. It has resistance towards a lot of negative emotions that we feel are negative, and so we resist them. And this judgment and resistance create this tug of war in our bodies and in our minds, because on one side we're swayed this way and then on another side we're swayed the other way. So our mind is very much like a scale. It wants to measure, it wants to know which one is the best one, which one would be the best choice. And it's always kind of in a very logical way trying to protect us, trying to focus on our survival. So when we live out of our mind, a lot of it is based out of our ego, and our ego is very focused on our survival. And whenever we live from our mind and our ego, it actually has a very lack mentality. Our ego thinks there's not enough. There's not enough time, there's not enough love, there's not enough money. So it wants to keep us in this survival mode, and it wants us to run away from things and toward other things. And anytime we're running, whether towards something or away from something, that's creating an internal tug of war with ourselves. And so that is the biggest way to know if you're living out of your head. If you're turned outwardly, if you're worried about what society thinks, what you should be doing, what you are missing in your life, and if you have judgment and resistance, chances are that you're also very focused on survival. So in your mind, there's not really a lot of space for success because you're so focused on just getting through the day or just surviving that the thought of having anything extra or abundance in your life, it just doesn't fit because you're so worried about surviving and living in a world of lack that you just don't believe that there's something else more than that. So in the earlier years of my life, I know that I was living from my head and I was sort of turned outwardly into the world. And the last few years, I've been living more out of my heart and turned inwardly. And so now we're going to go ahead and cover what that looks like and what the contrast is and what the difference is in the approach of living from our heart versus living from our mind and our head. When we live out of our heart, we're turned inwardly. So we're listening to ourselves, our desires, our emotions, our intuitions, the sensations that we feel in our body. We listen to our internal world. We're very tuned in into how we feel and what we believe. And at first, this might be scary because there's a lot of negative emotions that we carry, but being aware of both positive and negative emotions and listening to both without judgment or without any resistance will actually help us welcome these emotions, and it'll help us grow. Because living out of our heart, we're actually focused on union. Our heart is concerned with union, with belonging, with love, with acceptance. It wants to include everyone and everything, because our heart is sort of where oneness comes from, where that oneness of our heart and how we are one with the world and we are one with everyone and everything around us, that comes from our heart. And so our heart is much more receptive, it's much more accepting, it forgives and it gives, and it wants to unite. And when we live out of our heart, we're more concerned with emotion and depth and finding meaning in everything we do and every relationship we have. This actually helps us develop our intuition, and we can make better decisions because we can feel the energy in our body. Whenever something feels good, then the energy in our body will signal that to us. And whenever something is not good for us, then something in our body gives us a sign of that as well. And what I've found, particularly in my experience, is that sometimes my heart will say something and I'll have this emotion and feeling that this is the right path to take. But then my mind, my logic comes in and talks me out of whatever I initially thought I wanted. And so that's what creates this like tug-of-war, because your heart says one thing, your mind says something else, and you're kind of believing that you're forced to pick one or the other. And living out of your head is not right or wrong. Living out of your heart is not right or wrong. But finding the harmony and finding the right blend of both of them to help you determine which one you need to listen to is really empowering, because there are some times that we need to be discerning. There are some times that we need to protect ourselves and discriminate between what's right and wrong for us. But then there are other times where it's better for us to live in the moment and to go with what feels right then and there and just go with the flow. So every day I'm finding new ways to kind of find harmony between both of them and not have an internal tug of war. But I have noticed a significant difference of having this harmony and having this blend in my life. I noticed that in the past, when I live out of my head, I was really concerned with planning things and figuring everything out. Like I would literally get a calendar and I could plan like the next year or 2 or 3 or 4 in my life. And I wanted to have that structure. I wanted to have that certainty, and I wanted to be sure that I thought of every possible scenario that could go right or wrong. I wanted to just kind of have control. And that's what it's like to live out of your mind. You want to have control. You want to plan. You want to organize. And you want to prevent things from going wrong, and you want to prevent yourself from making mistakes. And so you plan. And while there's nothing wrong with planning, if you're planning and you're expecting things to flow exactly how you're planning them out, you're going to be very, very disappointed, because life always has different plans than we do. And so that's one of the things that I've noticed about living out of my head. I always was disappointed because I would plan things out. They would be perfect, written on paper, and it would never play out that way in my life. And so I would always consider myself like a failure, or there's something wrong, or I didn't do this right, or I didn't do what I was supposed to. But now that I'm living more out of my heart, out of intuition, and trying to find harmony, I still plan and I still create goals and things to look forward to, but I'm so much more flexible and I'm so much more open. And now when things don't go exactly as I thought they would or exactly as I planned, then I'm okay with it, because I'm more open and flexible, and reaching my first goal doesn't have to happen before reaching my second goal, because I'm kind of disconnecting them and making sure that I allow the time and the space for myself to grow. Because whenever I used to plan things out and then I would grow and outgrow my own plans, then I would be really angry at myself for wanting things, and then now I don't want them anymore, and why are they still on my to-do list when I'm not really excited about it anymore? So now, instead of forcing myself to do things that are on my list, I'm just like, oh, I don't like that anymore. I'm just going to take that off, cross it off and replace it with something that feels better here and now. And so I find it more and more that I'm very flexible. Like, I don't have to control every aspect of my life to feel confident. So I want to encourage you to pay attention to yourself and notice your patterns, your thought patterns, your emotional patterns, and listen to yourself to see if you're more turned inwardly or more turned outwardly. And neither of them is right or wrong, but I think finding harmony between both of them is going to bring you much more peace, and you're not going to need to live in this internal tug of war between your mind and your heart, always contradicting each other, always pointing you into opposite directions, and they don't ever really decide to agree. And so whichever one you're living out of, I would try to experiment on making the shift on what it would be like to live on the other side just for like a week, and just notice the differences that happen in your life. Like, if you're used to always living out of your head, try living out of your heart just like for a week, and notice if there's a huge difference on what happens and how life plays out for you. And the same thing goes with if you're used to living out of your heart. Try to live out of your head for a week and notice what kind of impact that plays into your life. So that is the lesson for today, just finding the contrast from living in your mind versus living in your heart, and finding the harmony of listening to both and combining their power so that you are not contradicting yourself. And when your heart and your mind are both united and geared towards the same place and going towards the same direction, you're going to be much more powerful in everything that you say and do, because both of them are aligned. Instead of having one being on your side and the other one being against you, combining both of them will actually give you a lot more momentum and help you move forward towards what you really want, and that abundance and joy and love and harmony. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you again real soon.
Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with a friend. Visit lovedreamlive.com for more. And remember to stop waiting. Decide to choose yourself. You can experience unconditional love, create the life of your dreams, and live in harmony and abundance every single day. See you again soon.